What up, everyone? It is Johnny from Jettle, and we are here with a brand new conversation. I'm joined by Lauren, very special guest. Hello, Lauren.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a nice Saturday. It's a bit of a rainy Saturday. I was going to say it's a nice Saturday, but nice day for a chat, therefore. And Lauren is a special guest because she went particularly well last year in her HSC. She came 5th in the state in PDHPE. Congratulations. And she was also school captain, which is very impressive as well. And I'm keen to actually chat about that because, I imagine there are a lot of other responsibilities that come into play. And I'm sure everyone's interested in how to balance your time throughout your final year of school. So, Lauren, do you want to give us a bit of background? I know I've said about the school captain, but what else, are you interested in? What are you studying at the moment? What were the things you were doing throughout year 12 other than study?
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, I was very fortunate to be anointed school captain of my school. And I guess what comes with that is kind of leadership, leading the prefect team in the school. But I was also really interested in the sport and all the Saturday sports that we have at my school. So I studied mainly sciences in school. I did PDHPE, biology, chemistry, science extension, and then English and maths advanced. So I guess that all kind of helped in a way with PDHPE because it's all kind of same focus. But yeah, I think my favorite parts of year 12 were definitely just being with friends and getting involved in all you can at school. And I feel like that made studying more enjoyable because you actually liked where you were. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. So tell us about time management then. Like, how did you go about structuring your weeks, your days? And maybe that changed, I imagine, throughout the course of the HSC. So perhaps when it was a little bit less intense, there was more balance in favor of those social activities. But talk to us about that. You went through the pandemic, so I don't know if there are a lot of 18ths, but talk about balancing, party, study, sport, your responsibilities. Give us the practical insights there. What did a typical week look like for you throughout those different sections of the year?
Yeah, definitely. So I think my main overall kind of advice, top tip, what helped me through year 12 is definitely organization. I know it's kind of everything that everyone blabbers on about in year 12, but when you have lots of commitments and if you have a leadership position in the school, you actually realize how much time you do have when you plan your day out, you plan your week out or your weekend out. If you block out spots to do things, if you block out, okay, this half an hour, I'm just going to cram out the speech, get it done for assembly, and then I can go on to studying biology or PDHPE. So that's probably my big top tip is just organize your day out in time segments, and that you actually realize how much time, I have half an hour here to just relax, just talk to friends, go on a walk, and I'm not going to be stressed instead of, let me try and do this in an hour, but it takes 2 hours. And in terms of the year schedule, so in the beginning of the year, it was probably the height of my school captaincy. So kind of getting everyone back to school, introducing prefect initiatives and kind of introducing the prefects. So I guess my study was kind of second place. But in saying that, it was still obviously most important. But I would just schedule my day. So I have in my freeze, I would designate a subject or designate just ticking off the easy things that I could do. And then at home, it'd be the study. And I guess, going into lockdown kind of took a spin of things. It kind of better and worse made it easier to study because you had so much more time. You didn't have to travel to school. And some classes, if they were a little bit boring, you could kind of just write some palm cards or kind of do some other side things that you could do. And then I guess coming up to trials, we had them online, which was quite difficult. But yeah, I think a good thing that we did in my school, which really helped, was we had online study sessions. So we'd all go on Zoom after school and we'd study together till about 9 or 10 at night. And it kind of just felt like you were in the library. So it was quite nice. Yeah, so we just had it open for our year group the whole night. Everyone loved going to the library after school. It definitely helped our year get through trials and beginning of HSC.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice. And something you alluded to there was kind of giving yourself permission to take some time off. And you talked about, not feeling guilty. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap of feeling like they always should be doing something. And even though their body and mind is telling them, hey, I need a break, I'm a little bit burnt out, they still try and persist with what they're doing. But often you end up doing that in a half-hearted way and you're distracted and, you're between, YouTube videos and on your phone, on the apps, and then you're going back to your study. And you might do that for like 5 hours and not really get anything substantial done. Whereas if you go in with the mindset of having 2 to 3 hours where you are going to do a solid amount of work, and then you allow yourself to have 1 to 2 hours off or any structure that works for you, you'll actually probably get a lot more done because it's focused and concentrated. So yeah, how important was that for you? And is that something you always did, or is that something you introduced into year 12?
Yeah, definitely. Such an important thing to kind of consider. I was definitely one of those people in year 11 who just would sit down and try and just do it. But I would be looking at my phone, or if I went on a walk, I'd be stressing about the English quotes that I haven't memorized or the maths homework I haven't done for the next day. But in year 12, when my timetable was jam-packed, it kind of forced me to be like, okay, I only have an hour this afternoon. If I don't get this stuff done, I'm going to fall behind. And in saying that, I would have training after school, and I'd be like, okay, just everything out of my mind, like just focus on training, relax, play with friends, enjoy the sport that is so enjoyable. And then as soon as I get home, I have an hour, let's smash it out, go to bed next day. So I guess what you're saying is that I completely agree with is just designate time to take time off. That's the biggest thing. And it's so hard, and I definitely struggled with it, just to switch your mind off study, because it's all you think about for about 12 months. But yeah, if you just designate time that, okay, my favorite TV show is on at 7 p.m. It's an hour long. Let me designate that hour just to relax. And then the next 2 hours after that show, then I'll smash out homework and go to bed. So I think, yeah, just trying your best to switch your brain off and then get back into it is really helps the study and helps you kind of enjoy your last year of school.
Yeah, of course, and that's so important to enjoy it. Like, you've got to savor the moment. You know, as I've said in a few conversations like this, like year 12 it's a rare year in that, yes, it is probably the most stress you'll have because of how much pressure we put on the HSC, and you know, there's some merits to having that pressure there because of what it can enable after school, but also it's not the end of the world if you kind of bomb out. But at least cherish the time you have with your peers and the fact that you're in an environment that you can't really get anywhere else. Uni is a very different kind of thing, and then the workplace, obviously very different. So you do have to cherish the social presence that you can actually obtain. And I know it was probably hard with the pandemic, and that threw a spanner in the works there, but it is a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity. So it's important to make the most of those experiences. But speaking to those experiences, you know, in terms of weekends and things like that, how much were you studying throughout the HSC on a weekend? If you can remember like exactly your blocks of study or sport, like run us through an example of an actual weekend for you.
Yeah, so I think before it got to exams, and if it wasn't really during an assessment period, it would kind of be Saturday morning would be sport or like hanging out, going on a walk kind of thing. And it would kind of just be ticking off little homework things, like if you had to write an essay or a paragraph for English, and then if you had to do some study for PDHPE, writing responses and things like that. That was kind of the more what I focused on when we didn't have assessment periods. But then when it got to trials in the HSC, it kind of switch, and I'd be like, okay, so Saturday afternoon from 12 till 3, I'm going to designate this to memorizing the PDHPE syllabus and writing responses on core 1 or something. And then when it got to kind of our stew back, so after trials or the week before trials, something that really helped me was designating my days as if it was a school day. So be like, okay, so this is period 1. I normally have PDHPE during this time. Let's do some PDHPE study. Okay, it's recess. Let me take a half an hour break, go on a walk, and then come back. My next period would be chemistry. So I'm going to go study chemistry. So it kind of, instead of in my mind thinking, oh, what do I want to study? Because there's always going to be PDHPE because I love studying it. I had to follow my other schedules because otherwise I would not be studying maths and chemistry, and that would not go well.
So that was before the HSC that you were following that typical school timetable?
Yeah, so before trials and before HSC, yeah.
Interesting. So does that mean you were doing like 4 or 5 subjects per day in terms of study? Because I've heard some different approaches here, and some people just do 1 subject per day or 1 to 2. I personally did 2, but it's great to hear other perspectives. And so I've heard this approach before as well, of following the timetable, because it takes away that decision-making fatigue and you just know what you have to do by following the schedule. So huge merits to that. But did you find that it was hard or to kind of like constantly switch between subjects? Did you sometimes reduce the amount of subjects you were doing so you could go a bit deeper into things? What about when you're doing practice papers that may have gone for 2 to 3 hours? Tell us when there were variations, if there were, in that schedule, and what you found to be the most effective strategy for studying on a per day basis before the HSC.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important to think about. I know different schools have different timetables, and it's all very interchangeable between schools.
Mm.
With our timetable, sometimes we had double periods. So I said, okay, I have a double period on a Friday afternoon. So that would be about 2 hours of maths or 2 hours of PD or 2 hours of English. So I tried my best in those times to kind of do those lengthier tasks. But definitely you can't always stick to the same schedule. Like if I'm in a role with maths and I need to do a past paper, if I'm in a role with writing PDHPE responses, I'm not just going to flip over to chemistry. So there was a bit of leeway. Like when I was studying, like, okay, like I just need to do an hour more of this and then I'm going to feel like I'm done that subject, or that's kind of, I've ticked off a mental box in my head saying, yeah, I've done enough of that subject today. So as much as I could, I tried to follow the schedule. But yeah, I definitely extended kind of hours on either side and definitely took some longer breaks than probably necessary. But yeah, it was not a fixed schedule, that's for sure.
Great. And in terms of the length that you were studying per day, does that mean you were just doing about 6.5 hours with the 2 breaks of recess and lunch, or were you studying more in the afternoon or nighttime? Like what was the average amount of study you were personally doing per day? You know, even if you go look to the most intense part of the preparation beforehand, what were the biggest days?
So I'm definitely more of a nighttime kind of afternoon study. I feel like the morning, it takes my brain a little bit to get working.
Likewise.
But I think in the depth of studying for trials, depths of studying for HSC, I probably did around 6 to 8 hours a day, which sounds insane. But once you do, okay, an hour block, 30-minute break, an hour block, 30-minute break, or even 15-minute break, the time goes past so quick. And something that also helped that me and my friends kind of competed with was the app Forest, if you have heard of it, the way you grow trees for how many hours you've studied and not be on your phone. So if you're on your phone, your tree would die. And so you can see how many trees your friends have planted. Oh my gosh, they've done 6 hours and I've only done 2. So you're like, okay, phone away, grow a tree. Let's try and beat my friend.
Yes, there's like some friendly competition there.
Yeah, definitely. So that helped get you motivated and help with those days that you just want to be in bed.
Yeah, no, that's a good tip. I think having that accountability to a study group is a great idea, and the fact there's applications now that you can actually enforce that on or gamify, then that's even better, and it's going to be easy for you to do that. Awesome. So let's look at PDHPE in particular, because as you said, it's your favorite subject. It's the one, well, I'm sure it's one of many that you crushed, but this one in particular, you excelled across the state. So what are your kind of key tips? Let's start very high level. What are your key strategies, key tips for people studying PDHPE? And you can go as in-depth as you want in this, or you can keep it broad, and then we'll tackle a few more specific things after that.
Definitely my big advice. There's two big tips I have. One is memorize the syllabus. It's one of those subjects, if it's one of the only subjects that you do that's kind of related to the syllabus, it's a bit of a weird thing to think about. So if you're doing chemistry, you don't really memorize the chemistry syllabus. But PDHPE is just memorize the syllabus. It's all those key terms. If you use them in your responses, it's just a big tick. And you can identify exactly what the marker wants from the question based on the words that they use. And you know exactly what dot point they're talking about. You know exactly what your examples are for that dot point. So that's 100% my biggest tip, is memorize the syllabus. I had probably about 5 different areas of my house that my syllabus was posted around. I had it in my shower, my bedroom, also when I'd wake up in the morning, I'd literally just stare at it. I had it in my study. My parents probably hated it, but...
Okay, so you put yourself in a situation where you couldn't avoid the syllabus. How did that look? So you had like post-it notes or flashcards, or describe exactly what that process looked like for memorizing.
Yeah, so I had, when it came close to the HSC in the trials, I had the printed syllabus printed out. So there's 4 different, you have the 2 cores and then the 2 options. And I just had 2 A4 pieces stuck together that kind of went to one of them. And I would just have 4 columns of them in different spots around the house. So if it was in the shower or I was in bed, I would just go over them dot by dot, dot point by dot point, close my eyes, try and say it out loud, and then open my eyes, be like, okay, cool, that dot point's done, next dot point. And then also I had flashcards. I would just write them down randomly if I was going on the train or in the car, kind of just going through my mind. yeah, it's such a weird concept to think about, going through a syllabus for a subject. But it helps so much, and you don't even realize until you in the exam you know exactly what the question's talking about, and you can use all the same terminology.
Absolutely. And how important was application then? So you have this kind of memorization part. How much were you applying the knowledge that you were memorizing?
Yeah, so I actually feel so bad for my PDHPE teacher, because I probably sent her about 20 responses a week. It was definitely heightened towards trials and HSC, but I definitely did more PDHP work than any other subjects, and definitely wrote more responses. She would always reply to my emails, being like, I'm almost there. I'm catching up on last week's responses. This one will be in a month. I'm sorry, which was fine. But the other thing I did that helped, so every time I sent her responses, which was my other second thing, was just write as many responses as you can. They can be awful to begin with, but as soon as you hand them in, you get feedback. What I did was I just wrote them out again with the new feedback, and then I'd give it to her to just have a skim over, being like, is this what you're trying to ask me to do? Is this what you're trying to getting at? Like, if does this example, is this more specific kind of thing? Yeah, so that was probably my biggest thing, is just writing as many responses as you can.
No, that's great advice. And to break that down a bit further, when you are writing those responses, are you doing that without looking at your notes? Like, or is this after you've memorized the notes? I imagine they're kind of happening, simultaneously, those processes. But are you aiming to answer them without looking? And then if you're unsure, you check your notes and then go back and try to avoid looking next time? Was it just that gradual process of really internalizing that material?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of different people. I know I had a few friends who just can memorize things in an instant, and I'm definitely not one of those people. It takes me a long time to memorize things. But I think what I did that worked the best for me was writing them out with my notes with me, so I could structure them well. I knew what kind of examples I need to use in them, addressing the key terms of the question. And then once I've handed it in for feedback, I've kind of edited it, then I would just write it again. And so then it kind of sticks in your brain. So then when you see that question, like, oh yeah, so I remember what example I used for that one. That was how to rehabilitate the knee or something. Yeah, so I think what worked best for me was just having my notes there to begin with, handing them in, and then trying to do it again without notes. But you can always refer back to them.
And what about short answers? Let's look at that. When you were actually doing those over time, what did you learn to cut out or add? What did you learn about how to structure responses for different marks? Were you always going over the lines on the exam paper, or you found that actually you were able to compress your answer to within the allocated space? Talk us through some specific structural elements of your responses, and if you can, just use a couple of examples of different types of differently marked questions.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably one of the hardest things I struggled with throughout PDHPE, was differentiating between a 3-marker and a 5-marker. And it's, well, what am I not including in a 3-marker that needs to be in a 5-marker? And what if I take this out of a 5-marker for a 3-marker? Am I going to lose marks? So I guess one big thing was that is just practice, hand them in. Your teacher will be like, no, you need more examples for this. And you're like, what? It's only like 4 lines for a 3-marker, and you've written the whole page. But that's by the by. I think with 3-marker, 5-markers, and 8-markers, it kind of depends on the syllabus dot point to begin with, but definitely with 8-markers, it's everything. 8 to 12 markers is just everything you can think about, all the examples, include as many examples as you can.
Were you often going over into new lines? And if so, how many? Give people an idea of what you actually did.
Yeah, so the way I structured my exams was a little bit weird compared to other people, but I would go backwards. So I would start with everything that's worth the most. So the 12 markers, the 8 markers, and then move back up from the 5 to the 3s. So what that helped me with is, obviously a 12 marker is going to be quite a few pages. It's not going to be a few paragraphs. So 12 markers, I probably wrote between 2 to 3 pages on. And then an 8 marker would probably be 1 to 2. And within that, you have your paragraphs depending on the syllabus again. And you kind of want to include 2 to 3 examples per paragraph. You just want to be like, this, if you can see this in this example, in this sporting, in this event, and if you do this and this and this. And that just really helps the markers be like, oh, they know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about, they know exactly what's going on. In terms of 3 markers, they're the ones I struggle with the most, especially 4 markers. There's sometimes weird 4 markers that's like, what is this doing in here? I have no idea how much I need to write on this. But with those kind of lesser mark questions, the most important thing is just to define the point they're talking about. Give a little bit of a deeper description about why is it important for sport or why is it important for rehabilitation or something, and then give an example, and that's it.
So three mark, you would say a definition, elaborate on its significance, and one example. You found that was what you were able to do and still achieve 3 out of 3?
Yeah, most of the time. Sometimes you would need to include maybe 2 examples. But most of the time it's just 1 mark definition, 1 mark elaborate, 1 mark example. Next.
Great. And a 4 marker, would you add a second example always, or did you find it was basically the same, qualified by, the nature of the question?
Yeah. 4 markers I always struggle with. The less the questions, lesser mark questions, I could not understand the structure of them. But I think what helped me was just sticking to that define, elaborate, example. And then with the 4 markers, I'd be like, okay, maybe I'll elaborate a little bit more after that example and add another example.
Okay.
And then 5 markers, just keep going.
So maybe just like 1 more of those examples, 1 more explanation of the example.
Yeah, I think that's probably an easy way to think about it.
I suppose it's not an exact science, and I guess people are always looking for the formula. It's good to have guidelines though, and I think that structure, that framework you gave is really useful for students. Define, elaborate, example, and then maybe an extra example explained for a 4 or 5 marker.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is just handing it into your teacher, being like, is this enough? Do I have enough information? Do I have too much information? That was one thing I struggled with, is for a 3 mark, I'd write a whole page. And it's like, well, this is worth 3 marks. You don't need to spend 20 minutes on a 3 marker, like cut it down. So I think, just handing it in, and your teacher be like, you need another example here. Oh, this isn't really in depth enough. And like, okay, now I know how much I need to put in a 3 marker, how much is in a 5 marker in comparison.
Yeah, great. And what about the 8 marker? Can you give us an example of how many body paragraphs you'd have and how long an introduction and potentially conclusion would be?
So 1 8 marker that just rings, I think I just did it so many times, I think it was about the rehabilitation of the hamstring and kind of the things that you need to do to kind of get the hamstring so you can go back into sport after you've torn the hamstring. And what would happen is you have obviously the paragraphs depending on the dot point and the dashes. But the first paragraph, you just want to define what it is, define what a tear is, it's a soft tissue injury, define rehabilitation, and then talk about the ways that you can rehabilitate it. So talking about those specific dot points. So it's, I think, progressive mobilization, graduated exercise, cryotherapy and hydrotherapy. Kind of, you can list those. You don't have to define those in the introduction. And then you have specific paragraphs on all of those different dashes. So the first one would be progressive mobilization, and you define what it is. You would then expand on how that actually helps you get back to sport, how that helps the hamstring to get you back to sport. You'd give an example. You'd be like, for example, if an AFL player who tore his hamstring during kicking a ball or running, sprinting to make a mark, needs to get back to the game, progressive mobilization through stretching helps to lessen the scar tissue, for example. And then you'd talk about it again. You say conditioning part of progressive mobilization helps with this, blah, 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 example. And then the next part, blah, blah. And that's the other thing with PDHPE responses, the more specific you can be in your examples, the better. It can literally be the most random example. You can be like, if a cricketer who was bowling a ball with the spin technique ran too fast and rolled his ankle, like it doesn't have to be just an athlete rolls his ankle during a game. If you can be more specific, the better. So random, just make up a story in your head as you're writing them.
Yeah, no, that's great. So did you going in have a few go-to sports and activities that you go to? Like how many did you have and what were they, if you're willing to share? Because it sounds like that's a really useful thing to have, like maybe 2 or 3 sports, and you've practiced applying examples and you think about all the different facets of that sport or activity, and you can just link them in those examples, as you said, especially for those extended responses. But yeah, how did you go about preparing to use specific examples?
It helped that I played lots of sports, so I could use my own knowledge into putting that into examples. But I know there's quite a few girls and obviously boys throughout the state and my class who weren't really into sports. They didn't really play many sports. So for that advice, I would give is try and watch as much sport as you can on TV, because you can see cricketers running, AFL runners, netball players jumping on their knees, like jumping on their foot and landing really heavily. And you kind of get an idea of how the syllabus links to that and how you can implement those examples into your responses. In terms of my own examples, AFL I didn't even play AFL, but AFL was a really good one to use just because there's lots of different things. So there's jumping, there's sprinting, there's kicking, there's passing, there's basically everything. In terms of, for example, netball, there's running, there's jumping, there's passing, but there's not the kicking. So I found AFL was probably my go-to example. So if I needed to talk about how some sort of strength training would help, I could say, AFL player could do leg presses to strengthen the quads and the hamstrings, which would help him jump to get the ball to make him up.
Got it. And that's like a sentence as an example there.
That would be an sentence as an example. So the more specific you can be and trying to incorporate the same example throughout the whole response is best. So you don't want to be jumping from netball to AFL to cricket to soccer. If you can try and keep it AFL within one question, then you can go to netball for another question. That's also better. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It's very practical advice, and hopefully everyone's taking notes, at least if you're doing PDHPE. Do you have any other general tips in terms of structure? You mentioned in terms of doing the exam, you're saying you completed the higher mark questions first. The first thing you did when you opened the paper was do the extended responses, and then you worked backwards.
Yeah. So obviously when you're in exams, you have reading time. So what I would do is I'd quickly read the multiple choice and I would look at them, try and just nut out what questions I know, oh, that's definitely that example. And then read all the short answer, read all the extended responses. And since the extended responses were in my brain, as soon as writing time start, I would just extended response. Because if you start the extended response, I found at the end of the exam, your hands are so exhausted.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I have to write 3 pages now. I'm so exhausted. So that worked best for me. But I know for others, they did multiple choice first, 3, 5, 8, 12, everything. So it's kind of find what works best for you, I guess.
Got it.
But in terms of other general PDHP advice, I think studying with friends and kind of teaching them also helped me. So my friends would be like, oh, Lauren, how do I structure this response? Like, is this do I have enough examples in this? Like, is this in depth? And I'd be like, oh yeah. Like I would almost read their responses and like mark as if I was a teacher, which is kind of weird.
No, well, it's I can see the merit of that. It's very helpful to kind of assume that marking or teacher's frame of mind, right? Because then you're looking at it in a more critical light.
Yeah, definitely. And you can be like, oh, you didn't really include a depth and an in-depth definition for this word. And you're like, oh, I haven't done that either in my responses. You're like, oh, I need to include more examples. This person has so many examples in their response. And the other thing that I'm not sure if other schools do it, but I know our school does it and a few other schools around us, is underlying the syllabus terms in your response. So that's where the syllabus memorization comes in. But if you underline all the terms that are in the syllabus, or if you underline, for example, when the marker reads, they can be like, oh, I can see all these different syllabus dot points. I can see 10 examples, tick, 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 tick. Instead of them having to search through and take their time with marking it, because obviously markers, they have so much marking to do. They just want to be 4 out of 4, 5 out of 5, 8 out of 8. And get on. So if you can underline those syllabus terms and underline, for examples, underline the definition of those kind of things, it really helps the marker and you almost get on the good side. And then they'll be like, oh, do I give them a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5? 5 out of 5.
That's great. That's excellent advice. In terms of the electives, what were your particular electives for people listening?
Yeah, so I had sports medicine and improving performance. So I know there's a bunch of other things, but I think what helped me in our school and our cohort was those electives or options helped with the cause as well. So they're all kind of interchangeable. So you could have the same examples, the same definitions for a bunch of things. But yeah, I think those people who have other different electives, it's just important to spend enough time on each of them. So if you have a favorite one, don't just do lots of practice responses on those. Spend your time wisely on all of them because they're all worth the same amount. They're not specific to one of them.
Yeah, no, great advice. And it as I said, all of the advice, or I'm saying, as I said, I didn't say this, but all of the advice you've given does apply generally irrespective of the electives, right? So yeah, so I think that's going to be super useful for everyone studying it, whether it's this year or in a future year. Are there any other, words of wisdom that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I think in general for year 12, just try and enjoy it. I know everyone says it to you and you're stressed, you have breakdowns, you're so mad at your parents because they didn't cook your favorite dinner after an exam because you were so stressed. But just try and enjoy it. Honestly, try and spend time with friends, enjoy your lunch times, play Saturday sport, just and get involved as much as you can, and you'll enjoy studying, you'll enjoy going to school every day, and it makes the experience so much more worth it.
Well said. And I have one final question I wanted to ask. It's to do with the school captaincy. What about for anyone who is running for school captain? Any advice for them? Because you actually have an incredible energy and presence, and I can see it. We're doing this on Zoom, but you seem like a school captain to me. Now, what do you? It might be a weird question, but what do you think are the traits? If you have thought about this, and I don't want to put you on the spot to make it sound like you're bragging or anything. I'm asking this, but what do you think it is that makes a good leader? And what are some things, if it's within anyone's control, that they should be thinking about if they want to go for a position such as school captain, or maybe you're at university and you want to be the head of a particular club and society, maybe you want to rise up and be a leader at a company. What advice do you have there, if any?
Probably my biggest advice is just to be authentic. Don't try and be the school captain, so try and be involved in everything, kind of trying to be on the good side of teachers or trying to get everyone to like you. Obviously those things help, but if it's not who you are, if it's not who you truly are, it's not going to come out to other people as well. And even if you do get elected in a role, that's great, amazing, but it'll show throughout the year that it's not really who you are. So I think just trying to be yourself, trying to be as confident as you can, step out of your comfort zone, and yeah, get involved in as much as you can, because I think that helped me as well. People from younger years, you can be confident, be funny, be approachable, be welcoming, instead of kind of just this boss or this lead, and everyone's like, oh, like, I'm really scared to talk to them.
No, that's great advice, really wise, because I find that the best leaders are the ones who don't try to be a leader, right? It's like it's more that they're just being themselves, as you say, which is hard, which is easier said than done, I should say. Especially when you're a teenager. That's why it's very admirable. Like, I feel like when I was at high school, I was a prefect. I wasn't a school captain or anything. And I can kind of look back and appreciate why I wasn't ready for that kind of role anyway. Not that, I just wasn't voted in as that. But I can see looking back that I might not have actually been ready. There's a certain self-esteem that I've seen across the board. If I look at all the school captains I know, there's a self-esteem, and they're comfortable with themselves, because I find that if you're not comfortable with yourself, how are you going to be yourself? To your point, just going into the nuance there. So that's a really hard thing to get. And when we talk about self-esteem and kind of just backing who you are, which then allows you to be authentic, and people, as you said, people can sense it, and they can sense when someone's putting on a persona, maybe because that is a reflection of them being insecure with their natural self, right? But most people at high school have those insecurities, and it's really hard to work through them. But I would add, since leaving school, that in order to be your authentic self, if you can learn to become more and more comfortable with who you are, and this could be a physical thing, intellectual thing, whatever, just really be comfortable with who you are and try and take steps to expose yourselves to uncomfortable situations, especially pertaining to any insecurities you may have. The faster you can chip away at those things and really own them, the more authentic you'll be, and therefore the more you'll be able to be a leader, because people naturally are drawn to people who have that kind of self-esteem and that assurance in themselves, because that gives people more faith that they'll be able to carry out the job, because they're not busy putting on personas. Amazing. Well said, Lauren. So thank you so much for being on here, and for everyone watching, thank you so much for viewing this video and or listening. If you're listening to this, we're going to get the podcast going and have the audio versions of this as well. So if you have enjoyed, please follow us on social, subscribe to the YouTube, and check out jedl.com for our most comprehensive resources as well. Otherwise, Lauren, thank you so much for being here. It was a real pleasure, and hopefully we'll have you on again sometime.
And I'm just going to quickly add, I loved your videos during year 12. They were definitely a little past time and definitely helped me through year 12. So thank you for providing those videos last year as well.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Thanks so much. We try to do it, and we're trying to mix up the content, and that's why we're doing these. People are actually resonating a lot with this, and I think when I was at school, it wasn't, we didn't have videos out there where the people who topped all the subjects were sharing their insights into the experience. So I feel like this kind of content is awesome, and I really appreciate you coming on, and everyone else who's been on and who may come on, because you're giving up your time but also sharing your experience, which you could just keep to yourself. But it's amazing that we have this kind of community developing. So we are going to have lots more tutorial-based content coming out. I'm going to do a lot more of that this year, even myself. But I've tried to incorporate this mode because I don't know how you feel about this, but I find like this kind of dialogue is another form of learning. And it's a really, speaking to what we were talking about just before, it's really authentic, and it allows people to see an unstructured conversation. We didn't plan any of this. I've just put you on here, and you're just drawing upon your own personal experience. So I hope everyone is enjoying this style of content. I plan to do a lot more of it. I actually want to do more, I don't know what you think about this, Lauren, but like more live interactive stuff where I do like interactive feedback and have people come on, and it's almost like, a free live tutoring session, and I just get a bunch of people and comment on different things. Do you feel like that would be valuable?
Yeah, I think something that kind of would be a good idea from that is, say if this was kind of live and people who were struggling with PDHP could comment and like, oh, Lauren, I'm really struggling with this subject, or like struggling with definitions. How do I do that? That would also be so helpful for those who are studying.
That's a great idea. So we'll bring you back on, and we'll get a couple of struggling PDHPE students, and we can make something work there. That's actually an awesome idea. We should bring in the current students, a couple from each who have questions for you, and almost have like kind of a panel-like experience. Thank you for sharing that. I will actually take that on board. Let me know if you want to be a panelist. All right. Thanks so much, Lauren. We will see you soon.